women's liberation movement was a diverse movement based in the United States in the 1960s to 1980s. The movement was about women demanding equal payment, being treated equally work-wise and family-wise, abortion rights, and mostly killing the stereotype that men were superior to women. The first wave of feminism, occurring in the 19th and early 20th century, was mainly concerned with women's right to vote. The second wave of feminism, the women's liberation movement, was focused on equal legal and social rights. The movement fought the status quo and focused on achieving equal rights to men. The movement rose by protesting against sexual harassment, pointing out that women should not be afraid to go to public areas without being scared, considering it was legal to harass women before 1964. Women took action by rioting with marches, strikes, and smashing windows of sexist stores like pornography shops and beauty pageants. The riots achieved a gain of employment for women of up to 42%, most of those jobs being traditional men's jobs. Also, the percentage of female doctors, lawyers, and professors rose. The movement empowered women to stand up for themselves and encouraged them to understand that their personal lives reflected the sexist power structure directly. This is important because even today, women are still fighting for equality all over the world. They fight for equal payments and the right to abortion, and women are still scared to go places by themselves at night, scared men will take advantage of them. Women in America had few rights. After being married, the law would not recognize them as an individual person anymore, and they would be dominated by their husbands. Single women were seen as the property of their fathers. Women were also not involved in politics or business, as it was a man-led industry that thought that women were not capable to work in those sectors. The first wave of feminism started with the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. The convention occurred when Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott were refused to be seated at the anti-slavery convention in London. 300 men and women were reassembled for the equality of women. The first wave was related to the abolitionist movement, to end slavery in the US. Both of their goals was to bring social reformation and liberation to society. After John F. Kennedy had created the President's Commission on the Status of Women, led by Eleanor Roosevelt, supporting preparing women for motherhood, and the Civil Rights Act in 1964, allowing employees to be hired not based on their gender, some still thought it wasn't enough to change the equality of women. This was seen with the state laws that restricted women to be able to use contraception, causing occurrences of rape and domestic violence. The second wave was introduced by Betty Friedan, a co-founder of the National Organization of Women, the NOW, to legally enforce justice and workforce opportunities for women. The second wave was women's response to their reproductive rights, domestic violence, and working conditions. Every movement is led by reformers and revolutionaries that paved the way for change. Women's rights activists like Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan became the voices of their generation.
About the feminine mystique and the way it's changed, breaking through it, the way it's changed all our lives to call ourselves person, is that we shouldn't have to make these choices anymore. You choose between profession and career. And
Betty Friedan, one of the early leaders of the women's rights movement in the 1960s and 1970s. She raised awareness as a journalist, activist, and co-founder of many organizations. Friedan published The Feminine Mystique in 1963, and it hit a nerve. Becoming an instant bestseller, the book gave a voice to American women frustrated with their limited gender roles and sparked widespread activism, as Betty explained, the problem that had no name. The publication propelled Friedan into leadership, and the book triggered action. In 1966, Friedan, together with Pauli Murray and Aileen Hernandez, founded the National Organization for Women, the NOW, still existing today. Their goal? To take action to bring women into full participation in the mainstream of American society. Aside from this, Friedan helped found the National Association of the Repeal of Abortion Laws and the Women's National Caucus. Through these organizations, Friedan was influential in changing outdated laws. Moreover, Friedan published several books, taught at New York City University and the University of Southern California, and lectured widely at women's conferences around the world.
Male or female, you are looking at the world with one eye open. You need to open both eyes and see the whole world to solve almost any problem.
Gloria Steinem, an outspoken champion of the women's rights in the 1960s as a social activist, writer, editor, and lecturer. Steinem helped create New York Magazine and wrote columns on politics for publication. She later launched feminist MS Magazine, tackling important subjects from the importance of work to domestic violence. She even wrote a book, Revolution from Within, as she believed self-image was crucial to making change. We need to be long-distance runners to make a real social revolution, and you can't be a long-distance runner unless you have some inner strength, she told People magazine. Gloria joined with Betty Friedan and Bella Abzug to form the National Women's Caucus, working on behalf of women's issues. Furthermore, Gloria wrote numerous articles raising awareness, lectured, organized important women functions, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Both women believed feminism wasn't just about achieving equal rights to men. It was about breaking the taboo and talking about women's issues. Feminism benefited women, but men as well.
Able to be themselves and to share the thing more. And then I think in the end, as the kids used to say, we will all be freer to make love, not war.
It begins in the 1950s with the beginning of the Equal Pay Act, when they tried to get multiple bills through, but they wouldn't move forward. In 1962, they finally changed the bill so that it was able to move forward. In 1963, it was signed. It eliminated giving a wage difference based on the discrimination of their sex, hence, the same minimum wage and an equal pay for men and women for a job that required the same set of skills from both genders. In 1972, they introduced a new federal law, Title IV. It bans discrimination based on education. It makes sure that girls and young women can take part in all public school activities. Title IV made it so that schools could not forbid girls or boys taking classes because of their sex. For example, it forbids colleges from spending all their money on boys' sport teams. Now, they have to equally split the money between girls and boys' teams. In 1966, 15,000 women played sports in college. By the year 2000, it was 150,000. In 1900, at the Olympics in France, only 22 out of the 997 athletes were women. In 2016, 45% of these athletes at the Olympics were women. Later, in the 1970s, the movement started to fragment. There was a growing sense that the core goals of the movement had been achieved. Opinions started to split about controversial topics. For example, professors in consensual relationships with their students, and if that was considered sexual harassment. About the validity of women's studies as an academic major. Whether mothers in the military should be sent off to war. Influence of the women's rights movement. The women's rights movement acted as a catalyst, inspiring women all over the globe to stand up for their rights, putting their gender grievances on the national agenda and encouraging a radical change.
The better, and women are infinitely various.
Do you think we can achieve the things we're marching for?
I'm sure you will. You won't necessarily achieve it through this movement. This movement will grow and it'll wax and wane, but I'm sure it's one step on the way. I must say I'm delighted to see them, and it's a wonderful turnout. I never believed that you would have got this. I think it's marvelous.
Similar movements around the world. An example of the influence of the women's movement is the political stand of the Canadian government as the second wave of feminism gained momentum in Canada. With more feminists joining organizations and women standing up for their rights, the Canadian government was forced to respond to the most challenging political pressure group. This was accomplished by the Royal Commissions on the Status of Women and the NAC, centralizing and catalyzing change for women's complaints. It encouraged reforms in education, employment, childcare, and abortion rights. However, the influence of the women's movement didn't just stay within America. By the late 1960s, the movement had spread to Europe, inspired by the events taking place in North America. The movement soon gained momentum in other parts of the world, reaching Asia in the late 1970s. Shaping the world. Since the women's rights movement, women have made enormous social and personal gains. Because of the millions of women who protested, lectured, petitioned, and broke new ground, our world is irrevocably changed. Women of our generation, and the ones that follow, are living the legacy of women's rights won against staggering odds in a revolution achieved without violence. The women's rights movement advocated a change in gender roles and fought for greater personal freedom and equality for women. It is thanks to the women's rights movement that the gender pay gap has radically decreased, that female employment rates have increased, and that the opportunity for women to graduate professional schools has become normalized. So, in the end, the women's rights movement shaped the world we live in today, decreasing gender roles and giving the women the opportunity to stand up.